My name is John Gravois. Came out from Redlands today with a little short car ride to the blue line, and then I got off at Union Station, got on the bike, and cruised downtown. So I got the full tri-modal experience in LA. I get some buddies from Austin. I think they got here quicker than I did this morning. So I've worked at ESRI about 10 years. I started out in tech support. I studied geography in school, and I worked in tech support, and I started doing SDK tech support, and I learned sort of my first programming on the job with trial by fire, just throwing in and messing around and reading other people's code and getting going that way. So after that, I worked on some mostly web projects. I've done a lot of JavaScript development since then. I worked on some open source projects at ESRI, and now I work on a product of ours that we call ArcGIS Hub. It's like open data for ArcGIS Online, and I'm sure some of you guys are using that. But basically, what I wanted you guys to know about me for this session, it's going to be 100% Python, and I am not a Python developer. So this is going to be, I wouldn't say blind leading the blind, because some of you guys I know are sharper than me on the Python. But what they wanted to do for the talk today was think about this this area. You know, people tend to think of the ESRI universe and the geospatial world and then everything else, the databases and open source and all that. But there is this awesome place that's the intersection of that Venn diagram where you're mixing and matching open source libraries, you're using some ESRI stuff, but you're not using the traditional sort of desktop software that you got to track down the license from the guy down the hall and get approval from somebody. So I'm seeing heads nodding, probably some in frustration or some, that's just kind of the reality of being at work. But that's kind of what my motivation was, or what I was thinking of when we sketched out the initial idea for the talk of how do you straddle the ESRI universe. And for me, you know, I probably would have jumped here instead, but they said the systems track, they wanted to be Python centric, and that makes sense to me. So to me, the thing that I think is the most value add, the most sort of best case example of how you straddle those two universes at the same time is our, we call it the ArcGIS API for Python. So this is a brand new web-centric API. You can get a hold of it for free, so you don't need to sort of get a license key and track all that stuff down. The idea of the ArcGIS API for Python is, although Python, you know, they say JavaScript for the web and Python for the desktop, when you are deploying, you know, web services and you've got content in ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise and you want to talk to it as a web consumer, this is the library that helps you do that. And then it leans on a bunch of other awesome open source Python libraries to do some of that heavy lifting. When you're ready to do the analysis on the client side, we're plugging into all the stuff that they were talking about this morning. You know, pandas and matplotlib and some of these other great analytical libraries that, you know, that's where Python really shines. So if you got through the links that I had shared at the beginning of the Google Doc for getting the dev environment set up, it was Conda is another Python sort of package manager distribution sort of way to, I don't want to say containerize, but it's a way to keep your dependencies sort of isolated so they're not affecting other projects. The route to install and work with the ArcGIS API for Python for free is to go and then get Conda laid down, and then you install the ArcGIS package, and then you're good to go. And that includes as a bundle the Jupyter Notebooks and all of the interactive stuff. So that was the route that I took. My primary machine is a Mac. You can also, if you have ArcGIS desktop software, it comes with the package. It's all installed and bundled together, so you can go that route as well. So I included some links to get rolling both those ways. But you guys were all here this morning, and I was hyped up on Docker too. I was smelling the fumes. So what we did during lunch was cram the banh mi's down our face as quickly as possible, and then say, let's do this whole presentation in a Docker container. So this is not my machine, and this is like the epitome of yak shaving too, because I would have just stuck with the original program because I'm a lazy bastard at heart. but my HDMI adapter is just even more finicky than Kagan's was this morning. So like, I don't want to touch my laptop and have the whole thing, the AV go out entirely. So we're like, let's peel back the onion a little bit and run the whole thing in a Docker container on Kagan's machine instead of mine. So you can watch me like fat finger on the Windows keyboard, and I figured the entertainment value would be a little higher. So that's the extreme, ridiculous, silly, or maybe really useful in production someday option that you can take if you want to. There's a meaty medium option of just laying down Python and Conda and ArcGIS on your computer like God intended, running code on your own machine. Or if you don't have any of that stuff laid down and you were fighting with the internet and the downloads this morning, there's a sandbox environment. So you can go to a website that has a Jupyter Notebook running, and you could just execute some Python scripts and play around and write some code without installing anything. So you may know who you are. You may find out who you are in a little while. Think about those sort of three things in your mind as the options for us for the rest of the afternoon. I'm not adhering to it so far, but at some point I'm going to shut up and we're just going to kind of start playing around with these sample notebooks and working through it. You know, if you've spent a lot of time in Jupyter Notebooks, you've written a lot of Python before and you want to start exploring and getting really brave, that's great. If this is kind of new territory to you, these notebooks are all plug and play, they're ready to go. You could stick mostly to the script, and that's a lot safer territory. So how far you stray off the beaten path is going to be a function of how comfortable you feel. And there's no wrong or right answer. It's just a matter of having fun with it. Has anybody ever seen the talk Inventing on Principle? I watched this, I think it was like 8 years ago or something, but this talk was a guy, he's just this rogue genius, and he shows off a bunch of demos. This is a talk, I could live 300 years and never give a talk that even like holds a candle to this talk. The gist of the talk is he talks about your operating principle or your motivation, your inspiration for the work you do. He talks about different people having different you know, sticking to different principles or thinking different things are important or jumping up the career path. But what he says that is the most important for him is this idea that all of his work is centered around moving a principle, and he's got one and everybody's got a different one, but he has a motivating principle and that inspires all of his work, and he thinks that that's like a way to change the world, and everybody's going to have a different one. And his inspiration in particular is this idea that in the whole world, creators need an immediate connection to what they're creating, and that anytime a creator has to wait or compile or have another step that separates him or her from what he or she is trying to sort of build at that time, it breaks down the whole process, and things, you know, great creative things don't happen because of that disconnect. So he wants to advocate for a world where there's an immediate connection between creators and the thing that they're creating. And I don't know why I thought that was so wild. I mean, it's just a great talk because it's an interesting idea, and he takes this off on another route. I don't know if that's like my motivating principle for all my work, but this idea that he feels that passionately about it is inspiring to me. And for me, I think a Jupyter Notebook is one example of, I don't think it was Brett Victor, he might have like done this on the side, but I think somebody else either shared his philosophy or something else, but they thought, let's build a tool so that when you're writing Python, you can see what's happening. Right when you execute the Python, you'll see the results of that. So when you're writing a script, you won't have to be in the terminal and then run it. And you know, even if a Docker container spins up pretty fast, like you'll be right there and connected to it. So how many of you guys have already like used Jupyter Notebooks? And it's almost half. This is just a website. And when you visit the website, you're opening a particular notebook, and you're here in this point, when you get to the point where you have a cell that has code, the Python code, you just insert the Python code here. And the thing that's really great about a notebook is kind of like everything else they talked about this morning, when you're saving your progress and you're sharing it, the idea that you can share a notebook with somebody else when you're done it kind of goes beyond open data and it becomes open analysis. So if you run an analysis on a data set for your agency, and then you share it, and you share that analysis with everybody else, and you explain kind of how you got to the conclusions that you got to, hopefully somebody else can say, oh yeah, I like that. I want to make, but I can make a little improvement. Or yeah, I like that actually just the way it is, but I've got a different data set I need to plug into. So I'm just going to go in and copy and paste everything that you had and substitute my data set and run it again. And then I'll have the output of the analysis too. So self-documenting methodology for analysis, I think, is useful. And also this idea of blending what you'd call like the more descriptive cells, where you have, you have screenshots, you could have text, you could have titles. As you talk through, you can tell a story in a Jupyter Notebook. So it's interactive in that there's visuals and there's code, and you've got data frame output. So you're mixing and matching visual output with something else. So that's the paradigm or the place that we're going to spend the afternoon during the talk. This is kind of the idea of like why I think that that's a compelling thing to do and something that's interesting. I think between everybody's like comfort levels and skill levels and where they got to beforehand, we're going to definitely do some Q&A. I think we could probably just do it all as a group the way we did this morning. So if you've got questions, my trusty associate is Alfredo here with the awesome ponytail. So if you need a hand, you're feeling like you're lost, you need your bearings, just put up a hand and we'll try and help you out. Otherwise, you're going to complete whatever steps you haven't completed already to set up your development environment. And that could be hosted Jupyter Notebook, just the Try It Live website. I'm not going to install anything because I'm not on my machine or I didn't get to it. That works. A local install or trying to do what we did with the containers. Do you guys think, when should I talk through the madness that is us setting this up in the container and running it in the container? Is this like, while it's still fresh in your mind from this morning, like right now, if we talk about it later, I'll be like, have shape files in my brain? Or is that just ridiculous because it distracts from the whole point of everything else we're doing? So we've got a consensus. I'll do the short version now, and then if anybody else is interested. So what I needed to do was, well, let's open up Visual Studio Code. What I needed to do was take a GitHub repo, some content that was on GitHub. So I'm going to open the Python folder. So in Kagan's container, I added all these new folders. I just added a bunch of new content. This was all inside the GitHub repo that had the notebooks already. Copied those in. Then I updated his Docker, not the Docker file, where's the little, what do you call it, requirements? Besides just pandas, I also added ArcGIS as a dependency. So this is using pip. Pip is an option to install the ArcGIS API. You can also use Conda, like I said before. Those are just alternative means. So we got ArcGIS. Then I added, I updated copy. Instead of doing like file by file, I just said copy everything in that directory and pip install from the requirements. Then we did this thing to expose port 8888. So that's the port that's running on the container machine needs to be exposed up to the machine we're running. And then instead of typing all the commands every time we run the container, we just wanted to stash that in the Docker file too. So we set the entry point to be bash instead of Python. And then we said that the command to send to bash is open up the Jupyter Notebook. You guys are familiar with that if you've already done it. That's just kind of the base terminal command. And then we need to do allow root access and run that on port 888. And we're not running the browser on the container machine. We're running that on our machine. So we're doing the container dance just to run the notebook server, and then we consume the notebook server from our machine. So that was almost all of it. The only other thing was when I ran the script, I had to specify that port one more time. So it's Docker run interactive with the port command. I think that's just mapping port 888 to 88. You could do a port like, I don't know why you'd want to do this to yourself, but you'd say that this port refers to another port. And then I made, you can see several attempts at building this container before I got one that worked. So it's ArcGIS 3. So if you're interested, you could go down that that rabbit hole or whatever, start shaving that yak. Otherwise, you just run it on your machine like an old computer scientist from 1995 would have recommended. And either way, or here, I'll show you this last one. So here is the developers.arcgis.com. There's really good resources in here. There's guide docs on setting up the development environment, different options, conceptually how you work around the API. There's an API reference. The guide has topics on themes that are more interesting to what we'd call like a GIS analyst type person that's doing data analysis. I wouldn't, from the systems track thing, I was thinking that you guys were going to be like the org administrators and doing a lot of like bulk administrative sort of tasks for other users. That has never been my most exciting thing, but I mean, some people, that's, different strokes for different folks. If you want to go down that path, there's a bunch of really cool stuff. If you're doing any like manual ArcGIS Online administration, this is going to be your new best friend. But the GIS analysts, I'm a geographer at heart, so I gravitated towards those. And I figured there's no sort of theme or issue that is bigger and more in our face and more overwhelming and needs analyzed than wildfires. And there's 3 really good notebooks that are specific to wildfire analysis that deal with raster imagery, both visible spectrum and non-visible imagery, and mashing up other data and doing overlay and buffer analysis. There's the 3 that I picked out was Thomas Fire Analysis, Fighting California Fires with Spatial Analysis, and then there's a historical wildfire analysis that does a machine learning on overlaying demographic data and wildfire data in the same place at the same time. So those are the 3 notebooks that you're going to start working through. And I'll show you an example here of, running it locally. You can see that this kind of worked and it kind of didn't. Once you've got this one open, try it live, you're just starting at the top. This run button executes whatever command is in an individual cell, and you plow through the cells, and then you see the results. And some of them have an interactive output that gets displayed right below. And you could just plow through, and my first mentor told me you never learn how to write any code without reading a lot of code. So even just trying to digest and grok, if you see a block of code that you haven't seen before, try and take a guess as to what it means, make a little tweak and see if you can break it and fix it again or make a change. I'll probably maybe take like 10 minutes to get my bearings, make sure everybody is like sorted out and ready to roll, and you can start plodding along. And then after 10 minutes of shutting up, I'll talk through a notebook, and we'll sort of like see if we can translate the code into English. But you run the cells and then making changes. So as soon as, if you want to make a change, type in some different text, you rerun it, you can compare and contrast. All right, and the link that's crucial, here's all the instructions to get it running locally, but this other one, it's in sample notebooks, I think in the thing. Where's the link to the sandbox? Had it before. I think it's, the best way I could do it is just notebooks.esri.com. Yeah, notebooks.esri.com. If you don't want to install anything and you just want to run this in a hosted environment, the drawback of this is you can't save your work and share it for later. Every time you refresh the browser, close the browser, it just kind of blows away your session. But for messing around and getting familiar with it for the first time, it's totally a good way to not get distracted by all the setup. Like I said before, exploring is welcome. And, going up the chain, the more ambitious you are, the more big changes you can make, trying to swap in your own data or make some, substantive changes to the notebooks. If you're just playing around with them and trying to grok them, I think that's relatively good for a 90-minute session too. And I got a bunch of links. So I'm going to switch back the links. There's the Google Docs, there's some good links. And then here in my slide deck, if you can spell my last name, you can hit the links to some of the extra resources and stuff to get started. Does anybody have any questions before we hit it's not the checkered flag yet, whatever the first lap. Don't be shy. All right, cool. So I'll be quiet for about 10, maybe 15 minutes. Come around if you want to ask a private question. And then after about 15 minutes, I'll come back and we'll talk through a notebook and actually, try to figure out what's going on in the code and how we could change it. And I'll add the link to the live hosted one.
Do the try it live.
Oh, individual ones will link. Yeah, that's a good.
So once you get to this,
Alfredo's already helping. It's not the home page, but any individual notebook that you're interested in, you can go straight to the try it live version after you pick out one that looks interesting. So you can take a look at it on the website and then launch it from each one.
so you can literally just go to developers.arcgis.com, put this on the notebooks, pick one, and then try it live.
All right, so I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Just
go ahead.
ready to use maps today.
Can you change this?
Oh, okay, yeah. All right, thank you. No, no worries. No, this is cool. I do a programming class. It's not really what I was going for, but I'm taking. It'd be fun. It's for digital. So it's like.
Yeah, so then go over here to Geospatial. These are your different examples. So for each one, pick one. Try it live. And then it already.
That Conda sandbox
Just turn that. They want to do something like geodata. That's not. Okay, and then this thing.
It looks like it's recorded.
Oh, and this was live stream.
Yeah.
Cool.
If you want, if you're ready, I can download apps. So you can download apps. That way I don't need to get introduced to Wildfire.
Sort of similar. Got a lot of people
For coding, yeah, so I'm teaching. Yeah, I'm teaching.
Yeah,
That's one of the Wildfire. In terms of automated.
yeah. I didn't you never asked that. That's more.
Yes. Sometimes it hangs.
Yeah.
It's just yeah, the other option, you can do it locally or you need to install all the notebooks, they can copy these cells and kind of pop it. Yeah, they're gonna run that whole notebook without. And then they would that comes in too, but it's a lot. The internet's trying. Yeah. If you're cloning, my recommendation is depth 1. You do like dash depth 1 because you don't want all the history of that repo because they, for some reason, they commit a bunch of big files in it. So if you're not too far in that command, that's an option, or just the zip file. If you got, blazing fast internet at home, it's no big deal. But if in this situation, cloning without going too far back in the commit history should be a little faster. And that'll take a little bit because it'll kind of hit its thing. I just get that a couple of minutes. Should go. I don't think it's as involved as all the container stuff. Well, I noticed a couple problems even in the line. But it's distracted.
Oh, it's not starting.
Exactly. You're about I'll look at it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, that's great. Mine's you guys are getting stuck and blowing stuff up. That's you're on the right track.
That's the way it's supposed to be.
So yeah, when I ran this, on the container ones, the whole thing is not really, but I noticed on the line, it's supposed to compare our base search here. And it was only this. So it is just like another thing you think. The notebooks are quirky to begin with. This no, you can do all this stuff. You couldn't install it just pro desktop. But on a Mac, just plain old Mac, you could install the Conda and the ArcGIS API and the Jupyter Notebook. You could do all that straight up on the Mac. There's actually, yeah, no, that's fine. Under the guides, it says like getting started and set up. There's instructions for Conda. Yeah, you use Conda. Yeah. So try plowing through that. Security, no, but why not? Oh yeah, and that's, I've got a flash drive with the GitHub repo on it too, so if you're having trouble with it, I think it's formatted.
Well, okay.
I feel like we've been. Oh, yeah. Even looking more grizzly than you.
I know, I feel like you like old time. Yeah.
Plaid. How you doing?
Civic tech and communication.
Yeah, this is like
Yeah, you know, I always do it like survey. You know, when they want to do everything, they all were like one.
Sweet.
Kind of like you know, of this world is I used this morning too.
They did a whole session on how and I before that more conceptual, thinking through metrics, how you define metrics, less capable, sort of getting without getting distracted. Yeah, for sure. So like we didn't coordinate, which I kind of wish we had. We did this thing of like here's some stuff, here's some other stuff together. And I don't know, so far so good. I think everybody here is pretty plugged in.
So I guess for my students, it's like I'm doing all like virtual items.
Yeah.
And so like they haven't internet installs on their computer.
Yeah.
So I'd like to.
Yeah, the hosted notebooks are cool. They're kind of limited and they can't save in a session. But I don't know if there's a way you could have an export, look through it and export and have some sort of artifact. And then get too sidetracked.
Yeah, I mean, it's like super close to like data. It's more kind of like you're doing a few little things here in Scripture. I mean, that's sort of because I use this one.
Yeah, I think that was at the other end of the spectrum of like getting the clever with the environment to make it reproducible in a way that's like, yeah, it's not. I don't think that's the as trying to keep it from
yeah, so if you were doing it hosted notebook, they do something, export it, and save it.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never tried to like think about it. There's some of our stuff we're using new stuff is stuff got all these lessons and you pick and choose like based on a theme and June. What's that? Oh, yeah. But most of them are and some of them are using some desktop. I think they're kind of compelling case studies, and they're paired up with some stuff. And I don't know, I'm curious.
See, this is kind of what they're used to, and I know like sort of a little bit about Jupyter Notebook world. world. But you know, this is sort of what they're used to.
Well, and too, you must be able to host. You're hosting a Jupyter Notebook server somewhere that they can use to save stuff. It might not be too challenging to set up. They're playing.
Yeah, so yeah, so yeah, so that so I want to show them how so like this.
Sweet. No, that's cool. That's cool.
Play around with it.
Yeah, hit me up too. I was curious. And I know some folks that do higher ed stuff like that. Be strategic and do some next generation stuff. Cool. Yeah, you took it. Yeah. Well, and it's a mix of like the notebooks will have some ArcGIS. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to start doing next. Cool. Yeah, how to do stuff. Sure. This is just a repo that had all the samples, which I think, you got that. So you install Conda and so that's a package. Then you can go in that folder and run Jupyter Notebook, self-run the server. All right, you guys are doing good. Let's start. Yeah. Oh.
I have a quick question. I'm working with a different notebook, but and it's I don't need to search for a particular data set, but the range is 0. It's not that range. So is it possible to look content?
Well, and that's a good point. So that content should be in
the samples, right?
No, this is calling out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's trying to shortcut. So do a search and then the first result of the search, I want to show that. So what we could do is try to figure out, well, let's do that one. Let's see if we can figure this out on the fly.
Yeah, like, you know, I put it in my basket, which like
Okay, so now we're in troubleshooting mode. Somebody's working on the Analyze New York City Taxi Data Notebook, and they get like 2-3 steps into it, and then when they try to fetch that New York City taxi subset feature layer, the Python interpreter throws back list index out of range, and we're trying to set the search subset is index 0. So the way this code is supposed to work is you've got a keyword and you're writing the demo and the sample. You know the search is going to return a result. So go out and search, and the search returns not just one, but a whole collection of like suggestions for the match. And then this is just a shortcut to say, I'm just going to trust that the first one in that list that comes back is going to be the one for me. But when that blows up with list index out of range, these folks were clever enough to realize that if 0 is out of range, that means you've got an array with absolutely nothing in it. So now we're in debugging mode, and like looking right here, I don't know what's available to us. The thing that we've got to ask ourselves is the API misbehaving, or is there actually no content there? Which is the thing that's breaking down? So what we can do quickly to check, and I think they tried this already, we can go to arcgis.com. And I think they added some new stuff, so this will make it even easier. But I'm going to copy paste because I want to use the exact same search string. I can search for NYC taxi subset, and then just look at layers. And the stuff that met my criteria is absolutely nothing. So I think that's the same thing that we're hitting. This is a public search. This is looking for open data. I haven't logged in. So ArcGIS obviously lets you share stuff privately and do more hush-hush work, but this is supposed to be open data. We're not finding anything here. So, I mean, I have no idea what it is that I'm actually looking for, but I'm gonna just try without the underscores. Our chance of success is relatively good because hopefully maybe somebody made a copy of this. LGA, drop off, pickup density. This is in New York. These are all tile layers though. I need a feature layer. That was the, here in the Python notebook. Oh man, I keep killing myself because this is not a Mac. There we go. Feature layer. So I'm just filtering my results here. The taxi data snapshot. So this is the name of this one. I'm gonna try to see if I can swap in this data set. Andy EDN. This is a guy, I used to work with this guy. 5117, that's fresh enough for me. So let's try copy and pasting in and searching for this instead. And there's two ways this could go. This could either work, boom.
So do you need to match the exact string for the title?
The search is not exact match. The problem with searching without the exact matches, you might get something different than you expected. But this is searching. When you do the search, there's the title and search tags and some other stuff, and they're introducing more fuzziness and semantics. The work that my team does on open data and ArcGIS Hub specifically for local government or whoever else our customers are that they want to expose stuff to search, we do more like experimental startup-y stuff, and then it kind of percolates back to the home base. So the search work that we're doing is a little bit at a time hitting ArcGIS Online. So there's more search facets and tags and ways to break things down. So that was it. That was, I got lucky with that one, but we just found another data set. And what happens, you see some of these notebooks, you're just here when you create this GIS instance at the very beginning, this represents your connection to ArcGIS Online. And by default, a lot of these, it's just GIS parentheses. That means I'm going to talk to ArcGIS Online. I don't want to tell you who I am. I'm making an anonymous, I'm going to make a bunch of anonymous requests, and I'm only going to get the results back that are shared with everybody. There's some other notebooks that have username and password, and maybe even optionally a whole custom portal. So if you've got content behind the firewall and you're in a totally sandboxed environment, you can authenticate and you're going to program against that the same way. So here I figured out, how to fix a problem in the code. It didn't really have anything to do with Python syntax or anything else. It's just that the content wasn't there. They do some sweeps where they wipe out content and then they reset it because some of these dummy accounts, like they're just for playing around. They're not for production stuff. What's that?
Does the name of the content that's supposed to be
No, that's how you can get more search results than you're actually looking for. So if you use a really common title, there's nothing stopping you and I from creating an item with the exact same name. They have a unique identifier behind them. There's always going to be something to keep them separated, but there's not. If we enforced like unique names for titles for items, we'd be in trouble pretty quick.
So how do you know that the NYC taxi data snapshot is like what you're trying for?
So in the sample where you just say, I'm grabbing subset 0, you're grabbing it before you know. But then here, because we're in a Jupyter Notebook, they have this, this little printout to the console that tells you what you got. So you could see as you're working through, you're seeing what you're getting. You're not controlling it as much. But if you wanted to write more code to trap for, I'm searching for something and it's not enough. I don't want to just do a title search because I'm afraid I'm going to get the wrong thing. I want to make sure that the author was me or somebody in my organization, or that it was modified on a particular date. So you could get more restrictive in your search to be more sure. And you're always going to get to see what you got. But these are always these samples are kind of dumbed down to be, you know, they're supposed to be foolproof, and yet they still break because content disappears or whatever else. That's actually a really good question though. But say, here's an example here. We got map. So as soon as we've got this data, we want to draw it on a map. This is our, this is just a thumbnail because I haven't executed that code. So here's an example where there's a placeholder. And then as soon as I step down through here, it's going to replace that placeholder image with a real interactive map. And I think it's probably going to take a second to query all that data out. Zoomed in. The placeholder's down there. But this is a Slippy map. It's actually got the content in there. I don't know why it's not displaying the points. There's a gazillion of them. It may be that it's got a scale dependency set. Let me just zoom in really close. And I'm going to look at my developer tools too to see if I can figure out what's going on with that. Thumbnail. I don't know why that's not matching up. But either way, say I wanted to sort of write a little bit more code. Sometimes there's enough here where, okay, I want to set the initial zoom level to 11. You could play around with this and set it in like really close to street level and run it again and see it at the individual block. You know, it's all well and good to just play around with the codes that's there. But this API, you know, the notebook is, you don't want to get a false sense of limitation on what you can do just based on the code that was already there before you started. You always can and should trace your way back to the API reference. So we looked at the homepage and the sample notebooks and the conceptual guides, but there's also this API reference here. And this is the meat and potatoes of what the API can do and what it can't do. So we were over here in agio.gis.map, and that came from that GIS module here. So if we go back down here and go to ArcGIS GIS, there is, I think it's actually under the widgets because it comes in this map view widget. This comes automatically when you get the map. So you can add a layer. So this is the same thing we were looking at before. Create a map and set the initial location, add layers to the map, set the base map. So if I go back to my notebook, here I just made, got the search subset, I made the map, I set the initial starting location and the zoom level, I've got my subset map. If I wanted to have a different base map, I can go back here and leave, because I don't have anything to save. And we can see, look at this base map property. Base map property takes a string argument. So here's a list of the values that are allowed. So I'll just switch to gray. So I'm going to add another line here and say subset map dot base map equals gray, and rerun this cell. And then we get the gray base map. So traversing around the API reference to see what methods you can call, what arguments they expect, and what's going to come back to you. That's kind of how you get started. And these notebooks, the complicating factor, and this is kind of like this is just how open source works. All of the power of the Python API, it's like Esri's not creating all of it. We're pairing with a bunch of other open source stuff. So when you're using matplotlib or NumPy or some of these other packages, you're going to jump around and look at their documentation and then jump back to the ArcGIS documentation and make them all work together for you. But you know, some of them are going to have better documentation or more new samples than other ones. All right, that's probably a big enough bite size. We'll give you guys another 10 minutes or so to play around, and we'll find another little opportunity to talk through the next thing. And we got about a half hour left. So I wanted to sort of have some like extra credit bonus points, like here, do the notebooks and make these special changes, but I couldn't come up with anything that seemed like, I don't know, not dorky. So I want to hear from you guys if you got comfortable, you start to run through the notebooks and you're actually trying to swap in some different data that you know about or add something to it. I want to hear what your ideas are to not just run the notebooks as they are, but to make some changes to them. All right, I'm going to talk through one of the more involved notebooks. We got about 20 minutes left. I think maybe I'll spend 10 minutes or so. We'll go blow by blow through all the cool analysis that's going on in this historical wildfire notebook, and then we'll do a little Q&A at the end if that works for you guys. So this one's a little heavier too on some of these other open source libraries. So I'm going to plow through. It's pulling down. I think we got to download. Let me see. Yeah, this one actually, I gotta get this download. And I'm hardwired, so I should be okay. I'll try and set this up and then maybe we'll get started in 2 minutes. All right, so this one, there's a prerequisite of having a local geodatabase because we're going to be working with a fairly big data set on historical fires. It's in a file geodatabase format. It's an ESRI format that they download from US Forest Service. So when I get in here and run, the first couple things are just sort of talking about what we're interested in, the questions that we're interested in answering, you know, whether wildfires are increasing over time. I think we all got a clue, we just need some proof. Where the hotspots are, and then whether machine learning could help us sort of figure out and automatically categorize the cause of the fire, given how big it is, where it is, and when it was. So we're installing ArcGIS or laying down ArcGIS, Pandas, and NumPy. You guys are familiar with those at this point. Keyring back in. Did I blow this up? GS profile. Oh, Delta maps. Cannot use stored passwords through GIS persistent profiles. I don't think we need, we'll see how, if this isn't gonna work. We'll try it with this and I might blow it away and I'll see. The file's local though, so we don't need to necessarily sort of get to the internet and get some private content. So I just downloaded this and updated the file path and ran this data. So the same thing, it's a Pandas data frame. And ArcGIS has a spatially enabled data frame that relies on Pandas under the hood. So we're getting that all up and going, running this shape. None type has no attribute shape. See users. I wonder. Mystery. I don't think he's got. Oh, I see what it is. So let's do this. Gonna update that file path again because it looks like the geodatabase is inside the folder that I was looking at before. So instead of just there, I think it's data. How did I get Greek turned on this keyboard? Holy cow. I was doing so well until somehow I changed it to Cyrillic. Okay. Can't get me down though. Data with a capital D. Okay, I think this is the right path. Users. GeoGangster, RDS, data, 70508, fires. Not working. I'm gonna think maybe this blew us up. Nope. Stumped. Oh well. Well, I got something installed. A problem locally, but we could still talk through this. So you guys saw earlier the data frame rendering in the terminal. So pandas can just spit out a reference of sort of how a CSV table looks like in the terminal. There's also a handy little visualization for that here, so you can see what the attribute table for the fire data set is. And I think it's got a little short thumbnail before you actually even run the code. So here what we're doing is applying, and this isn't, this is coming from pandas. When in the ESRI world, we take a column and have what we call a shape where we have the whole geometry nested. And here using the little data frame code, we're just taking the lambda and sucking out the X and Y values from that one column and mapping those to two different unique columns of their own. So we create two new axes for the data frame and pull out the rest of the columns that were there. And then this pickle file, this is new to me, but this is this input to the machine learning algorithm at the end that they're going to train that model. So there's some other code that I don't completely understand here of mapping some of the attributes of what's in the model. They want to figure out, depending on the day of the week, how big the fire was and where it was, what the most likely cause is to train it. And then in the interim, we do this matplotlib is giving us some charts. So I think I'll switch to the, here they've got some samples. So here you're totally outside the ArcGIS ecosystem. So looking up the code for this or the API reference or helper samples, this is all matplotlib specific stuff. But this is helping us create a bar chart as opposed to a pie chart. Choose the color, give it a title, and it generates a PNG image of this. So it's something that you could share. It's dynamically coming from the data, but we're writing a little bit of Python code and getting a visual output so you could share this with somebody else for a presentation or something else like that. I think there's another one here, yeah, where we do a histogram and take the different categories of causes and creating a pie chart from that and setting some minimal values on how much of that slice is going to be a particular cause. And here's where we look at comparing days of the week, whether there were more arsons, and it turns out there's more arsons on Saturdays and Sundays because arsonists are busy at work like the rest of us during the work week. And this stuff's all matplotlib as well. And then we get back into some web-centric content. So we were working with the local file at the beginning, that file geodatabase, but running some hotspot analysis. This is kind of one of those cool things where you could do this with open source, but you'd be on your own to figure out how to sort of get it all set up and run the model and get an output. This is all web-centric. So we want to take an input data set of points, have the server, have ArcGIS just deal with running that hotspot analysis and creating web content that is the output of the model all on the fly. So we could turn points into hotspots and see where the surges are. And we're just kicking off. All of that work is getting done and running via subscription instead of us using our machine for it.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Does that require spatially enabled data frame, but can you do that within pandas using the ArcGIS API?
You're mixing and matching. So you could do spatially enabled data frame stuff with pandas, via the content that you pulled down, or you can say, oh, here's an item in ArcGIS Online, just run this kind of analysis, and exactly how you pass the arguments is going to be different. But yeah, for sure.
But you don't need the spatial data frame to do that.
No, yeah. And this is like equivalent to going in ArcGIS and aligning in the map, doing everything manually, importing a data set, spinning up a web service, and then saying, I want to run a hotspot analysis on this. There's a little GUI, click, 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 spit out an output that is my content, and I'll decide how I want to share that as a result. So this is just helping you sort of define a workflow like that in code so that you can share the whole thing as a finished product, as opposed to back in the day when I was a kid, GIS analyst, we did model builder, and you chained them together and you connected the arrows and you ran the inputs, and this is just a much cooler version of that. And then this sklearn, this is taking that pickle file, and this stuff is like all way above my pay grade, but there's a bunch of good examples where you could kind of try to reverse engineer what they're using as inputs and what sort of they're trying to train the model to say, like looking at day of the week, looking at size, looking at these things all at the same time. That's all from that input data set. And this is an open source module. Here's where we mix and match again with ArcGIS, where you don't always have access to great census data or demographic data that talks about population density, what socioeconomic status people have that are commonly, but making a call to a web service to say, join that data together, take my fire data set and enrich that with some demographic stuff. I'm interested in these key variables, then run a machine learning algorithm on that. You get a lot more, it opens up the potential for you of how creative you can be. And we think we've all been in that situation where you're munging data sets and trying to sort of come up with a model based on the information you can get a hold of, and being able to tap into subscription demographic content and join it sort of via an automated that's super useful. And I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, I guess that's probably all I got to say about that. So and that's just another good example of blending something with the original data set. And at the end of the day, we check back on the accuracy, and they get accuracy level of like 92%. So if another fire happens, run that new fire through the model, and it'll say, okay, what day of the week was it? Where was this fire? What's the socioeconomic sort of prevalent background in that area? We can tell you whether it's arson or not, and we'll be right about 90% of the time, which is, I don't really know how that affects firefighters, like as they kick off their investigations, but you got to imagine that doing that initial diagnostics, there's got to be a lot of wasted time on, when do we bring in the dogs, and when do we go on a different route? All right, so less than 10 minutes left, and we covered a lot of random territory. Hopefully, I mean, I didn't think anybody was like doing wildfire analysis in their day job. I figured it's as fun as anything to do as a learning exercise. But hopefully you guys came up with, that got your juices flowing, thinking about what you could do with all the data you guys are managing behind the scenes, some sensitive stuff, or whether it's public stuff to, obviously the talks today, we've been all over the place, but Hunter and Sasha in the morning session were talking about sort of being responsible and thinking about how to put together a model, how to track targets and set metrics that are going to be actually useful and less gameable, and then operationalizing it with something like this to take that raw data and come up with some of these output values that make sense and that pass relevant information on to decision makers, I think is kind of where you're going to go with it. So I appreciate you guys spending the time with me, and you can hit me up if you want online. I'm John at ESRI.com, because my last name's so French. Otherwise, on GitHub or Twitter or whatever else. Nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong. So thanks, guys. And if anybody's got questions or want to chat more right now, I'm happy to do that too.
Thanks.
Yeah.